What's up guys, welcome back to the workshop. Before we get into today's video, let's do a quick pocket check. Josh, what do you got?
I'm excited about this one. I'm borrowing it from a friend. I've got the Hogue Deca in CPM Magnacut.
Dude, that Magnacut was all over Blade Show, man. It's like the newest, latest, greatest steel, right?
Yeah, it's like taking the world by storm. It's developed in 2021 with Crucible and the guy from Knife Steel Nerds. So he actually like worked really well with them. It's a, in a lot of ways it's a premium steel, but it's kind of mellow in some of its attributes. Knife steels are usually compared in 4 main categories: toughness, edge retention, corrosion resistance, and the ability to be sharpened. And this scores really well across most of those. Surprisingly, it scores really well in the corrosion resistance. The chromium content was reduced in the Magnacut so that it made way for some of the other chemical properties for the alloy, and it also scores really well in toughness. So toughness is measured in like foot-pounds of torque, and it's the amount that it can bend before it breaks.
Okay.
And the Magnacut, I think it can sustain, all these tests are very different and it's a little bit subjective, but like D2 is a really tough steel that can sustain about 20, 21 foot-pounds of torque, and the Magnacut can sustain like 16 foot-pounds of torque, which is incredible, especially if you compare that with like 20CV or S30V, which are going to be much closer to like a 6 or an 8 foot-pounds of torque, depending on the hardness level. So, and I think that's what makes it such an incredible knife and such an incredible steel. Kyle? You get that?
Yeah, it's great, man. That's awesome. I love hearing about steels.
Okay guys, in all seriousness, we are gonna talk some knife steels, some super steels, and we do have a Magnacut knife here that our friend Zach from Z Stuff, you can check out his YouTube channel, he lent us so that we could do some comparisons.
Thank you, Zach.
We've actually got here a selection. They're all different knives, obviously, because they're all different steels, but we've got the 8CR13 MOV, kind of a budget steel. We've got D2 on the CRKT Squid XM, which is, like I mentioned in my little rambling there, it's a tough steel, but it was not specifically created as a knife steel. It's more of a tool steel. 154 cm on the ProTech, we've got S30V on the Benchmade, and we've got Magnacut on the Hogue here. So we're gonna compare just a handful of those. This video though, I'm gonna talk through some of the differences and just a little bit about knife steel, and we're going to understand if some of these super steels can be sharpened. We'll skip to answer the question for you. Super steels can definitely be sharpened on work sharp sharpeners and most knife sharpeners. Where it can be challenging is on more traditional styles like Arkansas stones, water stones, those types of things. It's just going to take a long time. In general, the abrasives that we run on our belts, the diamond, the ceramic, all of that is harder than any steel. And so yes, they can be sharpened. What we're gonna look at today is Kyle's gonna sharpen or just raise a burr on all these knives, and we're gonna give some brief evaluation of how big is that burr, did it form easily, how long did it take, and I'm gonna walk through some of the principles of some of these different steels. A lot of the information I got off of the Knife Steel Nerds website. Worksharp is a Patreon member, so we have access to read all the articles. I believe you can just read all the articles for free. That's an awesome resource. But you get them early if you're a Patreon subscriber. So that's Laren Thomas over there.
Yep.
Cool dude. We've not met him, but some really valuable information. And he was, the kind of the architect behind the Magnacut steel, and he worked with Crucible to develop that. So let's start by looking at some of the basic, the 8CR13 MOV. We're gonna be looking at a Kershaw knife here. 8CR13 MOV is a pretty common knife steel used for kitchen knives and scissors, and has a very corrosion resistant properties. It's commonly used, it's a Chinese steel, it's commonly used in a lot of kitchen knives. If it's not labeled what type of steel it is, if it's a, I wanna say a value forward or a budget knife or a knife set, then it's likely made out of 8CR13 MOV. high chromium contents leads to the corrosion resistance, and also high chromium content tends to lower the overall hardness and the edge retention. But budget steel. Next up, we'll look at D2. We've got the CRKT Squid, Lucas Burnley design. It's actually the Squid XM, which has that G10 scale and the D2 blade steel. D2 is frequently referred to as a tool steel, which I'm not sure if, people throw that around a lot. I don't know if they know what they mean by that, but essentially it's really tough. It's got high toughness, upwards of 20 foot-pounds of torque can be put on that blade, or on a blade of a knife. I guess it would all depend on thickness and that type of thing, and it's not overly corrosion resistant. It's not technically a stainless steel, so it does have the potential to rust, although it does, some people call it a semi-stainless steel. It does fairly well considering it's not stainless and it has a very low chromium content. It has reasonable edge retention, although it holds a toothier edge better. It's got some larger carbides inside of it, and so polishing those out can be a challenge, or at least so they say. I've not actually done a lot of the tests. 154 cm is kind of breaking into what people would call like super steels. Originally, 154 cm was designed as a high heat bearing steel, similar to 440C, but it has less chromium and more molybdenum, which I don't exactly know what that is, but apparently that allows it to be heat treated higher, and I guess that was designed for the bearings so that it could actually be operated at and around high heat. It has a mixed carbide size, and it is not overly tough, but it's actually relatively brittle on the scale of things, similar to like S30V, S90V up there, a little bit more brittle than it is tough. I think that's all there is to say on that. It's definitely getting into these super steels, has good edge retention, getting into, I could provide some of these numbers, like it would score above 500 on a Catra test, which is cutting through pieces of paper surrounded by like silica and sand, and it's, how much force does it take to cut through X amount of sheets of that. And so like there's all sorts of different factors at play, but in a standardized test, it's going to score a little bit better than D2, not quite as good as the S30Vs of the world, but in that range of like S45 or D2, and I guess in that range. S30V was another crucible created stainless steel. It has a fine carbide structure because it's powder metallurgy. So when you see that on many blades, you'll see a CPM. In fact, like we see CPM Magnacut, or sometimes S30V is almost always produced as CPM, but it's just abbreviated with S30V. That stands for Crucible Powdered Metal, so it's made by Crucible, a company that makes knife steel, and it's a sprayed molten metal into the bars or the blocks of steel, different than a hammered approach. Someone's gonna get at me for some of these details, I'm sure of it, but
no, they're gentle when it comes to this stuff.
I'm doing my best to simplify and kind of tell the story of these steels. I believe the evolution started with S60 and then S90V, but then it became S30V as the steel that was deemed superior by tuning and reducing the amount of chromium. It was thought that reducing the amount of chromium would lead to higher corrosion potential, but actually by adding vanadium to it, it creates stronger carbides, which gives you the ability to harden it more and better edge retention, but also the vanadium helped with the corrosion resistance. It freed up some of the chromium to actually bond to the exposed carbon, which is what rusts, and creates this like microfilm over the outside. It's really kind of interesting and mostly over my head, but you end up with a knife that is a little bit, or a steel that's a little more on the brittle side. I like it can take like 6 or 7 or 8 foot-pounds of torque rather than like 20 foot-pounds of torque like a D2 could. But great edge retention. You know, if we're looking at D2 and CM or 154 CM at like the 500, 520 range of Catra measurement, this is like in the 600, 610, and depending on how it's hardened, could even go up from there. Okay, Magnacut now. Moving through all of that, and here's where we get, so this guy, Laren Thomas with Knife Steel Nerds, puts together so much information about knife steels and graphs, and seriously, like, we'll link it in the description because so good. In 2021, this new steel came out. It was many years in the works. As you see, it's CPM Magnacut, so it is that same crucible powdered metal. It's a sprayed molten metal, which reduces the carbide structure, so smaller carbide sizes, which means higher toughness. Also, one of the other changes he made was reducing the chromium content. So a lot of these like high corrosion resistant knives tend to have a percentage of chromium, like 13, 14, 15% chromium inside of the steel alloy. Well, he reduced that to about 10%, and expected that the corrosion resistance would take a hit because of it. But, and I'm not sure exactly the reason, essentially the corrosion resistance is as good as anything out there, really. I would like rate it a 9 or basically a 10 out of 10 if there's a couple of knives that share that top spot. I think it performs slightly better than S30V. Sorry, it does perform better than S30V. I think it performs better than 20CV, which is incredibly corrosion resistant. But it has that same corrosion resistance, and it has strong edge retention. Not quite as good as S30V, but better than 154cm, better than D2, and it has insane toughness, almost as tough as D2. Not quite, but like on the same scale. If D2 is at 21 or so, Magnacut is like at 16. So you're much less likely to chip a tip or to chip the blade than you are with like with S30V, or S90V happens to be a steel that's really brittle. Which you'll see, like Benchmade has a lot of their Hunt line of knives is made with S90V, because you're not using your knife as a screwdriver, you're not working around like metal components, you're not like working on your car with one of these knives, you're field dressing an animal, and so you need that knife to stay sharp. Super good edge retention on S90V, but it's a little bit more brittle.
All right, Josh, just got done sharpening all these up, and results, some of them were surprising. Obviously, the softer steel in the, what is it, CPM, you say it.
13 MOV.
That one,
yeah.
The soft steel, threw a burr quickly, which we fully expected.
Yep.
The D2 was definitely the hardest to raise a burr on. That took some time to get to. I wouldn't want to sharpen that on a whetstone.
Oh, no.
Definitely want powered system, or I think our diamond abrasives on like our bench stone would do just fine with it.
Yeah, diamond does great, I think.
Yep. Surprising, the S30V and the Magnacut raised a burr fairly quickly. They weren't hard to sharpen, so that was actually kind of nice. I felt like I was going to be there for a long time, and didn't take that long at all. In fact, threw a nice burr too. Like I could really feel it, and I think it refined down really well, but that's not what we're here to do. We're just trying to see how long it takes to raise a burr on these knives.
Yeah, just checking to see if it, can it be sharpened, or how much time would it take to be sharpened. And really, I don't think that there's any major secret to it. If you're going to use a premium abrasive, either a powered sharpener or even diamond stones, a little harder to standardize like diamond stone sharpening. But the other factor in knife steel and measuring its premiumness is how easy is it to sharpen or grind. And we didn't really cover that a whole lot, because as a consumer, I'm less concerned about, usually that's like driven at the manufacturers, like, oh, can we work with this steel? And for me, once I get the knife, I'm like, well, I don't care if the manufacturer can work with this steel. I just need to know that it's going to be corrosion resistant, tough, and hold an edge. Like, so those are the three that I'm usually concerned about. But from the sharpening perspective, I think that there's some room for us to look into that. So I'm curious, do you guys care about like resharpenability or the ability to grind a knife steel? Does that matter to you guys? And if it matters, tell us how you would want us to test that.
Yeah, another curiosity I had as I was doing this is, and what I've found in using super steel knives is, not only when you sharpen them, but they also seem to respond really well when it comes to honing. And that could just be because the edge isn't breaking down as quickly, so you are able to like hone that edge back up. Maybe it's just a roll, whereas on a softer steel, that might be a chip. But it seems like all the super steels that I've worked with in the past tend to respond well to just a hone and a strop, and they're like seem to get a lot more responsive to that type of treatment than your softer steels. I don't know if that's true for you too, or
yeah, at least that's something I've experienced. I'm not entirely sure why.
Yeah.
As you were saying that, I wonder how D2 would respond to just a hone and a strop. Typically it is known to have a toothier edge. I think it has a larger carbide structure, which leads to that. So you've got these bigger chunks. If you're polishing that, you're breaking off a chunk and you're exposing another toothy section.
That makes sense.
So is that really going to polish up with stropping or fine abrasives versus, something like the Magnacut or S30V that has this really fine structure, and you can remove very small pieces of the carbides at a time and polish what is a really fine edge. And so maybe you can do that with a fine abrasive, but I don't know. I'm just kind of asking questions. Leave us comments. What do you guys want to see? Was this video helpful? This is a little bit of new territory for us. We obviously we like nice knives. We look at the knife steel. We have some understanding of what that means, but really this is a deep road we can dive into, and let's get a little taste of that. What are you guys interested in? And maybe we can flesh out a couple of questions.
Yep. Be gentle in the comments too. We know that this can be a crazy subject, so or have at it, whatever. What
let me know where I'm wrong. Yeah. I'm actually, I'd love to learn even more. I spent probably too much time reading those articles, and I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface. So I think that's it. We'll see you guys in the next video.
Thanks for watching, guys.